Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author and robot, and today I wanted to talk about this article that I saw just the other day because it kind of irritated me decent. It irritated me a lot, okay? And the content of this article is one that kind of goes around the writing community a lot and the literary community as a whole, and I don't think it is helpful to literally anybody. It's not helpful to the discussion, it's not helpful to reading, it's not helpful to books, and so I wanted to open a discussion up for the contents of this article with you guys to see what you think. So be prepared, possibly for some spicy opinions here, but maybe we'll agree more than we think. I don't know about you guys, but constantly with the social media, I see articles being shared that go in one direction, and I never see a rebut to it. And often it feels like because these websites don't want to share other opinions, they're pushing an agenda. And so let's take a chance here. Let's take the opportunity here to open the discussion up to the contents of this article. You probably have an idea of what the subject is going to be based on the title of this video, but before we get started, a couple of things. Number one, if you enjoy what I do on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. If you would like to be featured on this channel, check out the two links in the description below. Lemoy and PitchFit are two different ways that your writing can be featured on this content, and hopefully readers can find you, and even other authors can find you if you want to connect. And then number three, if you would like to get an ARC copy of my upcoming satirical novel, Boom Boom Boom, check out the description for links from NetGalley and Book Sirens. And if you don't want an ARC, well, there are two other books out at the moment that you can check out if you want to see what I write. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the meat of this. I don't think I have it in there. But from Literary Hub, they recently published this article called "Why Are So Many Men Still Resistant to Reading Women?" And the arguments in this article are so dumb that I think we need to talk about it. This is by Marianne Seigart. She writes, "All of us, to a greater or lesser extent, and often without realizing it, tend to expect less of women." So pausing already right here, Mary, let me talk to you one-on-one here. If you expect less from women, that is a you thing. I hate it when people form these arguments of how they're going to view the world and interpret the intention and the way that every single individual interacts with every single other individual. And because they have a problem, they assume you have a problem. Sweetie, this is projection. This is you recognizing that you have some sort of weakness in yourself, that you disrespect apparently women. I didn't say that. You said that. Your first sentence in this whole article is you saying that you do not respect women, you don't listen to women, and then assuming everybody else is just like you. That is the way that a 2-year-old thinks. A 2-year-old thinks that if they can't see you, you can't see them. So they'll cover their eyes and be like, haha, you can't see me. That's not how it works. Everybody does not respond to the world the way that you do. They do not have the same perspectives that you do, and they do not judge people or have the same experiences with various sorts of people. So I hate it when anybody makes these sorts of arguments of, I have this problem, which means you must also do this thing. No, that's just a way to make you feel better about your guilty conscience because you have a personality defect that you need to work on it. Also, if you say everybody does this, it kind of takes away some of the responsibility that you have to fix yourself because, well, why do you have to fix yourself? Because everybody's got this problem, so now you're going to tell everybody else what to do while not fixing yourself. No. Okay, going on. Tend to expect less of women, listen to them less attentively, and feel uncomfortable with them in positions of authority. That is you again, babe. But there are men who do not expose themselves to women's voices in the first place, across the cultural spectrum, whether the women are on social media writing books or appearing in films. If these men are not listening to, reading, or watching women, how can they accord them any authority at all? How do they even know if the women are any good? And how does Mary, in fact, know that men are not consuming women's content? She's making an assumption again based here on her perspective that she listens to women less. The easiest way to measure this phenomenon of women whistling into the void is to look at the books that men and women read. Nonfiction books are sources of authority on a subject. Fiction takes us into other humans' worlds and minds, broadening our empathy and understanding. Before going any further, may I ask you to take a moment to think about the last 5 or 10 books you've read and count how many are by male and how many are by female authors. If you're a man and your tally is roughly 50-50, congratulations, you are very unusual. As the writer Grace Paley once said, women have always done men the favor of reading their work, and men have not returned the favor. So there are a couple of things wrong here. Number one, she doesn't have any citations for any of these statements of men do this thing, women do this thing, which, so you're going off of opinion or anecdote here. Number two, Number two, I typically don't pay attention to who the authors of the books are that I am reading unless I sought them out. I can't tell you who the authors of the last 10 books I've read. I can't even remember what the last 5-10 books I've read are. Probably a majority of them are female, but you know what? I hated the majority of them. I've hated all of them. No, Eve the Awakening is fine. But 3 out of the last 5 books that I've read have been Jenna Moreci books. Or 3 of the last 10 books that I've read have been Jenna Moreci books. But I pick up a lot of books, not specifically because I'm interested in the content, but because I want to get into the psychology of that person. And then I don't have a good time because I don't like what the author is writing and I don't like the author's perspective. And then if I comment on it, the author gets pissed off at me. I've had this happen so many times, especially with female authors. And I'm not singling female authors out in that because I have covered male author breakdowns on this channel before when they got a critical review. But I've had plenty of situations. Let's see. I think the last female author that I sought out was Anne Rule. But the last handful of, I would say all of the female authors that I've read recently, I've hated. I've absolutely not liked the books whatsoever. And it's a tier list of the worst female lead characters between them all. It is... So anyway, that's not a good measure for anything. And then women have always done men the favor of reading their work and men have not returned it. So you're saying that you want people to read your books not because they're interested, not because they enjoy the content or they want to know what you're writing, but as a favor to you? That's not how you build a fan base. That's not how you get people interested in what you're actually writing. Who is treating reading books as doing the author a favor? I think the only time that I consider it a favor is when I'm asking for feedback from the reader. Now, I get that it is specifically the individual spending their time, their valuable time, reading my words, or I'm spending my time reading somebody else's words, but I don't consider it a favor. And I think that's a very dangerous way to go down because I've seen, both with television shows and with books, where the viewers start feeling entitled because they go, well, we viewed your content, we enjoyed your content, so now you must do what we want you to do because we've done you a favor by reading and consuming your content. Now you have to do us a favor by creating what we want to see. That's not how this works. So what the frick is Grace Paley doing? Saying, oh, it's trade for trade. I read your book, you read my book, and then we don't even have to like each other, but we can say that, it was a good book because we're trading views. No. That's not what actual legitimate writers do. That's not legitimate reading either. The first study to look at this was the little anecdotal but still telling. Oh, look, more anecdotes. Lisa Jardine and Annie Watkins of Queen Mary's University interviewed 100 academics, critics, and writers about their fiction reading habits. 4 out of 5 of the men they talked to, the last novel they had read was written by a man, whereas women were almost as likely to have read a novel by a male author as a female one. When asked which novel by a woman they had read most recently, a majority of men found it hard to recall or could not answer. I can't blame them considering the not great things I have read recently from women. But also I can look at these books and be like, they are written for women. Like The Savior's Champion, which is a death tournament, actually prioritizes the romance over everything else. And so it's written more for women. The Savior's Sister is, again, prioritizing female audiences with female empowerment, with the overpowered female character that everybody lusts after, with the mistreatment and maltreatment of all the male characters in that series, where they're either evil or they're a love interest, or there's Toby, who's a dumb as a box of rocks love interest. That's not enjoyable to read. That's not enjoyable for me to read, and I'm not a dude, but that is a female fantasy for female readers. That's not to say that there aren't going to be men that enjoy reading that, but the majority of men are not going to go and seek that sort of thing out. When asked to name the most important novel by a woman written in the last 2 years, many men admitted defeat and confessed they had no idea. Female authors make up as much of the modern literary canon as male ones, and so these men were reading only half the canon, while the women were sampling it all. Maybe the men assumed the novels by women weren't as good, but how could they tell if they weren't even reading them? So number one, I couldn't tell you what the most important novel written by a woman was in the last 2 years, but I also couldn't tell you what the most important novel written by a man was in the last 2 years. I guess if we want to go this route, I will take the crown for the most important novel written by a female in the last 2 years. So go pick mine up. But that's also subjective. The most important is going to be based on the individuals who choose what they think was valuable to be put out and that they read from. So that's not even a good moniker. But also notice how in this anecdote here, they didn't say, well, what was the most important novel written by a man in the last 2 years either. They didn't check for that. So that's setting up a bias. As the report concluded, and there's no name for a report in here, mind you, there's no citation. So again, completely anecdotal with no way to check anything. Even the questions that they asked, there's no way to check. So there's that. As the report concluded, quote, men who read fiction tend to read fiction by men, while women read fiction by both men and women. Consequently, fiction by women remains special interests, while fiction by men still sets the standard for quality narrative and style. If you think about the great American novel, I bet you immediately associate it with Mark Twain, John Steinbeck, Philip Roth, or Jonathan Franzen. But what about Toni Morrison, anyone? Harper Lee, Alice Walker, Donna Tartt? The Irish novelist John Boyne remembers attending a literary festival where 3 established male novelists were referred to in the program as giants of the literary world, while a panel of female writers of equal stature were described as wonderful storytellers. He actually believes that women are better novelists than men because he claims that they have a better grasp of human complexity. My female friends, for example, seem to have a pretty good idea of what's going on in men's heads most of the times. My male friends, on the other hand, haven't got a clue what's going on in women's minds. I would again like to point to Jenna Moressi's book that shows that she has absolutely no idea how a male's mind works, because all that happens in that book is a bunch of sex talking and trash talking, and that was not a realistic portrayal of men. I don't think it's fair to make these sorts of generalizations because understanding humanity or behavior is a one-to-one thing, and you can't assume that one gender knows more than the other gender for whatever reason. Also, I would be interested in knowing what the genres were for these separate groups of writers and what the marketing is like for either of them, because I personally interpret giants of the literary world to mean that they have broad appeal and that's not necessarily a niche sort of thing. Whereas if you say wonderful storytellers, I do take that to be more of a commercial success, something that they are very good in what they do, but they're very specialized. Like, say, they work in romance, because you're not writing as deep work typically when you're writing romance. I'm not saying that romance stories don't come with deeper topics in them or can't come with deeper topics in them, but we have to understand that there are different levels of complexity in storytelling, and that people in general approach different genres differently, with different understandings, with different levels of seriousness or not. Readers even look for books differently based on how they're feeling and the type of depth they want in the reading material that they're looking for. So to go, these things are totally equal while taking away all of the nuance between them is completely ridiculous. Boyne is unusual, though. Most people seem to have a different expectation and therefore different standards for men's and women's fiction. This is what allows some men to believe that women's writing is not worth reading. The Irish novelist Anne Enright explained this beautifully in the London Review of Books. Quote, "If a man writes, 'The cat sat on the mat,' we admire the economy of his prose. If a woman does, we find it banal. If a man writes, the cat sat on the mat,' we are taken by the simplicity of his sentence structures, its toughness, and its precision. We understand the connection between cat and mat, sense the grace of the animal, admire the way the percussion monosyllables sharpen the geometrics of the mat beneath. This is just the truthful, very real sentence. Look at those nouns containing both masculine mat and feminine cat. It somehow says it all. On the other hand, a woman writes, 'The cat sat on the mat.' Her concerns are clearly domestic and sort of limiting. Time to go below the comment line and make jokes about pussy." What? Again, this is Anne Enright's problem. I don't read a book like this. I don't even consider the author generally when I'm reading a book. I know that I start looking for broad ideas of how somebody might interpret the world or feel about the world, like looking at Jenna's work. It comes across like she really hates men, and I'm not going to make that assumption about Jenna. I don't know her as a person, but as I'm reading the Savior series, there is so much vitriol and animosity towards men in those books. They're not allowed to be smart. They're not allowed to be kind. Generally, they're not allowed to have their own problems. Their entire personalities depend on somebody else existing. And so the portrayal of men in those books actually shows me a sort of disconnect, a distrust, a hatred and animosity towards men. I can't claim that sort of thing is how Jenna feels, but that's what comes through in the stories. Now, I don't look at men and women and then say, give me this same sentence and I'll interpret it differently. I am constantly always looking at the story as a whole, and I try not even to get caught up on if there's a trope in a story or what, because tropes are going to happen. I try to follow in line. What is the story trying to be told? Who are the characters and what are they doing? This level of scrutiny where you're ripping apart a random sentence to say it's okay if a man says it and it's bad if a woman says it, that is a you problem where you are obsessed with judging and categorizing people based on their categories. Work on yourself and stop assuming that everybody does this. It actually just makes the world more aggressive when you act like this. Mary Beard told me that she was once on a book prize panel, and it was absolutely clear to me that the men picked really lengthy books. They would pick them up and say, "This is a really weighty contribution," and what they meant was, "This is a very male contribution." Literally, what? You're picking up a book based on its size and then calm down. Since when does size have anything to do with male? Again, Jenna, and I hate to keep bringing up Jenna, but sorry, 3 of the last 5 books I've read were hers. 2 of her books were like 700 pages. So what are you talking about? Then one of the other judges said in the end, we're going to have some short books. It's not that the contributions of men and women are colossally different, but the affirmative objectives that are used to make us think that we can all agree about this candidate rather than the other one tends to heavily correlate with male candidates. Like what? Exactly. Women don't do weighty things. Those are words that are not so glaringly correlated with the gender, but they're a code for gender. Literally, what? The men who use those words are as unaware as anybody of that. We all know instinctively that heavyweight is code word for male. No, we don't. Again, that's a you problem. There is so much of this projection of this is the way that I view the world, and this is the way that I see things, and this is the way that I put coding on top of literally everything, and because I see it this way, then when you use these words, you must be seeing it this way, and you must be making the same kinds of judgments of everybody as I am all of the time. No. I have this problem all the time, actually, where I tell people that I am very straightforward and I mean what I say, and if you take something out of what I say that I did not actually say to you, that is all on you, because I am a straightforward person. I really don't do a lot of nuance. Because if I have a problem, say, I'll actually mention it if I want to talk about it. If I say fine and I have a problem, that's not code word for tell me more things. I've run into so many problems before where I tell people that I am straightforward, don't read into what I say, I don't attach values to like deeper values or deeper insults or deeper compliments or whatever to anything that I say. It is what it is when it comes out of my mouth and people still read into what I say. That is a you problem. Do you know how frustrating it is to tell people that you will be straightforward and you say something and then they reinterpret it to mean something completely different and there's nothing that you can do to fix that? That is not a me problem. That is not an everybody else problem. If you see heavyweight and you think this is male, if you see somebody say this is a weighty problem and you think male and you put a negative connotation on that, that is you. That is you gendering everything, labeling everything, and then judging everything based on your own biases. Work on yourself and stop saying that everybody else does it to make yourself feel better for your inadequacies. The novelist Camilla Shamsi has sat on a number of prize judging panels. There are male judges and female judges, she told me, and the women judges are putting forward books by both men and women that they think should be shortlisted, and the male judges are largely putting forward books by other men. Again, everything in here is anecdotal with no references for anything, so it could be made up. I could just as easily say, I was on a panel of judges one time and I was the only female on the actual panel of judges, and all of the men just kept picking female written books for all of the subjects. They said that it was just time to stop picking men books and only picked books that had female names on the cover. My story has just as much legitimacy as these do. One year, she decided to call it out. As the panel sat down for their first meeting, Shamsi drew attention to the fact that the prize had only ever been won by 1 or 2 women. The next time they met for the long listing, each of them having supposedly read all the books submitted for the prize, a male judge had on his shortlist a couple of books by female authors. When he was asked about one of these books, he shrugged, looked at Shamsi and said, "Well, I put it on because such a noise was made on the first day about women not being included." He clearly hadn't read it, she says. Yeah, that's what happens when you start pushing for diversity for the sake of diversity. Nobody gets there because they're earned it. You can't get mad that somebody tried to hush you because you are forcing them to do something that they didn't want to do. Now, if somebody is not reading books that were paid for and submitted to a contest when it's kind of their job as a judge to read all of the books submitted and then make a choice, okay, fine. But you can't be surprised when somebody says, okay, look, I'm appeasing you. I'm putting this on the list because you threw a fuss. And I just wanted you to let it go. This is what happens, okay? It's during the prize picking, I don't feel like it's time to try to change people's minds because you're asking for something fairly large here of the individuals you're poking at. But then the really telling thing, she goes on, was it got on the long list because others of us, which is to say the women judges, had read it and really liked it. And when we came in for the next meeting, the male judge was a very passionate advocate of this book, which he had finally read and found to be wonderful. Oh, look, he read the book. He put a book on his short list for reading for the judging thing, and then he went and read the book, and then he judged it just fine. Look, there is so much disdain in the way that this is written from this woman to men, and the way that these people are speaking from women to men, that it's no wonder that nobody would want to read your books. It annoys the crap out of me that people like this will be so hateful and so vitriolic and then wonder why the people that they are attacking don't want anything to do with the content that they're making. Amanda Craig is a British novelist who writes state-of-the-nation fiction. Yet, as Sarah Hughes asked in The Independent when reviewing Craig's latest book, The Golden Rule, why is Amanda Craig not better known? Her novels, which have tackled topics from the plight of undocumented migrants to the effect of Brexit on rural Britain, fit neatly into the sphere occupied by celebrated likes of Jonathan Coe, yet somehow she is not a household name. I couldn't tell you, but I could tell you that I wouldn't read either of those books with either of those subjects because I generally am not interested in that. That seems like a female thing, but I don't know anything about Jonathan Coe. I don't know how Amanda Craig approached it. If she approached it from a family and relationship point of view, that might have something to do with who her readership generally is. This is probably because the influences Craig draws on are seen as female and lacking in weight. She has never been afraid to reference myth and fairy tale in her work, previously playing on the story of Theseus and Ariadne, and spinning comic gold from the updated telling of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Yet it seems that an interest in how stories feed the imagination is considered less compelling than tricks of language and form. What? Wit and creating an obscure retelling are different things, but also if she's doing retellings, that might be why she's less popular, because not everybody is always looking for a retelling. Just saying. But there is that. And very similar books written by men and women can be judged. Also, there's no example of like what her comparison person does to give us an example of what she's being compared to. So that's not fair in this article either. And very similar books written by men and women can be judged differently. Camilla Shamsi won in the 2018 Women's Prize for Fiction for her novel Homefire, a retelling of Antigone in the context of the War on Terror. It covers deep contemporary themes with an overlay of complex relationships between three Anglo-Pakistani siblings, the son of the Home Secretary. But, she told me, when my books get talked about, people get much more to the familial and the romantic elements out of them. And actually, the men are writing as much about romance and family, maybe more, but they get talked about in terms of the larger political stories that they're telling. So we'd actually have to have a comparison of what she's comparing her book to and what her book is about, to read them, and then to compare the elements to see where the focuses are at for those things. Because I can't trust anything in this to say, well, people focus on the relationship aspect over there. Yeah, and people focus on the relationship aspect of the Savior's Champion because the majority of it is actually about their relationship. Is this a phenomena of English-speaking world? Definitely not. The Norwegian author Karl Ove Knausgaard was vetted for the 6th-volume autobiographical novel My Struggle, a minutely detailed account of his domestic life that would probably have been deemed inconsequential if it was written by a woman. Why? What is the main readership of that book, and what is the main writing of that book? And this writer, whatever Mary is bringing out her own biases, sitting here going, look, Carl's book is inconsequential and should be ignored because if it was a woman, it would be ignored, and I think that it should be ignored because it's by a male author. She is showing her own biases to dismiss other people's books based on their gender, not based on the content of the book, because this isn't even telling us what the content of the books are that she is judging and saying, just forget about it. She is mistreating women herself, saying other people are mistreating women, and then saying, I'm gonna fix it because I'm criticizing you for my behaviors. This is why I can't stand this kind of crap. In 2010, Belgian author Bernhard de Wolf won a prestigious Dutch literary award, the Libris Literature Prijs, for a semi-autobiographical account of day-to-day life with his children. 3 years earlier, a jury of the same prize lamented the fact that women so often write about personal trifles. So this just sounds like a bitchy woman who's angry that other people are getting noted for things that she wants to be noticed for her version of them. Stop. You sound like a jealous hoe. To see a better and bigger picture of the extent to which men were failing to read books by women, I asked Nielsen's book research. Oh, and let's talk about what was the male to female readership on that Dutch book, by the way, because that's not listed in here either, but it's saying, oh, it won an award. I see books written by women winning awards all the time. Let us throw back to a freaking romance book that won Best Sci-Fi just last year in a contest that I was watching. Excuse me. I did a book review of that book on this channel. It was not cohesive. The series was not cohesive either, but it won an award because women. No. To see a better and bigger picture of the extent to which men were failing to read books by women, I asked Nielsen Book Research, the gurus of the book trade, to reveal definitively who exactly was reading what. I wanted to know not just whether female authors were deemed as less authoritative than men, but whether they were even being read in the first place. As a result, bore out of my suspicions that men were disproportionately unlikely even to open a book by a woman. Overall, looking at the top-selling books, fiction and non-fiction in the UK, women read slightly more than men. The readers of those books were 54% The readers of these books were 54% female and 46% male. But when you break them down by author, the results are dramatically different. So that's not surprising. Reading has generally been a female's hobby, or more female hobby, even if it's just slightly more female. For the top 10 best-selling female authors, who include Jane Austen, Margaret Atwood, as well as Danielle Steele and Jojo Moyes, I can't help but notice that you did not include J.K. Rowling, probably because she has cross-sex appeal. Only 19% of those readers are men and 81% women. Yeah, see, I bet if you included J.K. Rowling in there, that number would be very different and not support your look. But for the top 10 best-selling male authors, who include Charles Dickens, J.A.R. Tolkien, as well as Lee Child and Stephen King, the split is much more even, 55% men and 45% women. Okay, so let's break this down on what this actually means, because this isn't also fair the way that you're doing this. Not everything is equitable. You cannot make everything equitable, and you cannot make audience genders equitable across genres, because different genders are drawn to different content. So, who are these people? Jane Austen writes women's fiction and social satire, basically, that capitalizes or mocks or brings forward, talks about women's issues, women's relationships, women's place in society. That's pretty much what it relates to women's lives often, and also romance. Not big R romance, but the relationship aspect of whatever. All I really know of Margaret Atwood's career is The Handmaid's Tale, which is a dystopian that demonizes men and victimizes women, and that is a female fantasy. Dudes in the comments can correct me below if they have a different feeling, because obviously I can't speak for all men, just like I can't speak for all women, but generally it's a female fantasy to objectify and subjugate women, and then have that female empowerment of destroy this society or take leadership of this society or work against this society. And I always understood that men generally do not like to see women get hurt, so they don't typically like books that are about females' subjugation. And that's not saying that there are not men that do enjoy that, because there are. There's also like a kink of that, but the majority, because we've also got like 19% in here, but the majority, this also doesn't actually break down the individual percentages, and Jane Austen, Danielle Steele, and Jojo Moyes are heavily going to tilt that percentage mark, I think. Danielle Steele is famous for writing romance, and when I looked up Jojo Moyes, she writes chick lit romance. So those are both female-heavy, female-driven, and chick lit is described as by women for women. So it's not surprising that it's typical that they have a much higher female reader rate, and the men are just not picking up their books as often. You cannot compare that to the epic fantasy of J.R.R. Tolkien. You can't compare that to the more commercial, interchangeable Lee Child or Stephen King, because women are interested in horror and thriller, and Charles Dickens, whatever, he's literary fiction. So what, everybody reads that in school and in college, and then that's pretty much it. These genres are not equal, and the fan bases between them are not equal either. There's more crossover in stories about solving a crime or about going on an adventure than one that is about women in society or women's relationships, and that is going to heavily slant your reader base. So this is just insincere, this comparison. In other words, women are prepared to read books by men, but many fewer men are prepared to read books by women. What if I said you can have more men picking up books by women if you wrote less about women's stuff? Oh, that would piss her off, right? But romance novels are written for the female fantasy. However, if you look at the kinds of books that men go to for a really good time, which are typically like crime novels or army novels or something where they get to save the day, something where they're going on an adventure and beating the bad guys and getting the girls, women can actually fall for the male fantasy because of the male ideal type. However, in a women's romance or women's fantasy, the men are catered for the women. So there is a difference there. If you look at the stuff that Lee Child does, like Reacher, you look at that male hottie, and that will bring in the women as well as bringing in the men, because that is a male ideal as well. The male wants to embody that character. The women want to be with that character. You pick up a romance novel by a woman, and men are not typically looking at men in women's novels to be like, I want to be like that guy. Because it's wish fulfillment from the women's perspective. And it's not attractive to men, typically. And I don't think that it's attractive to men typically. Again, I'm not saying all, and there are going to be variations in all of this. Like I said, probably going to be, I don't know, probably some of this might be taken in a spicy way. But again, I'm just having conversation about this stuff and how it makes sense to me. And based on my opinions and experiences and my understandings, which may be incomplete. So take that as you will. And the female authors in the top 10 who had the biggest male readership, the thriller writer L.J. Ross, uses her initials, so it's possible that her male readers weren't aware of her gender. So again, here she's assuming that it's only because of her gender and not because of the genre that she's writing, which is thriller, which has more crossover and interest for male readers. But no, it's because she put her initials on the cover, as if they don't do that in romance, as if they don't do that in other genres. It is only apparently because she didn't put her freaking name on the cover of a thriller novel. Are you joking? What does that tell us about how reluctant we are to accord equal authority, intellectual, artistic, and cultural to women and men? Margaret Atwood, self-evidently a writer who should be on bookshelves of anyone who cares about literary fiction, I disagree, but okay, has a readership which is only 21% male. Male fellow Booker Prize winners Julian Barnes and Jan Martel have nearly twice as many, 39 and 40%. Hilary Mantel has only 34% male readers. But what are their genres? That's something that is not fair. You have to talk about what the genres are and what the gender interest is in individual genres. You cannot divorce the reader base from the genre. It's not as if women are less adept at writing literary fiction. Quite the contrary. In 2017, all 5 of the top 5 best-selling literary novels in the UK and Ireland were by women, and 9 of the top 10, and it's not as if men don't enjoy reading books by women when they do read them. In fact, they marginally prefer them. The average rating men give to books by women on Goodreads is 3.9 out of 5. For books by men, it's 3.8. So, 1, I call bullshit on this because there's no reference for where she got these numbers. Number 2, she's going, not only are we brilliant, but men like us better. Can I take stuff that never happened? You're making stuff up here. But also, I don't see you raging about the inequity here when 9 out of the top 10 of the best authors for 2017 were women. I thought the goal here was equality, was so that wasn't more equaling toward, so that the scales were not tilting more male or female. But here we are doing it, and it's a-okay, and you got nothing to say about it. I think this paragraph right here outs the author for what it is she's doing, other than that she hates men. But that's just my analysis. I'm not going to make any claims about Mary, but that's what is coming across here to me. It's a supremacy desire. It is a desire to humiliate. It is a lack of nuance, and she is either being purposefully dishonest or she is incapable of dissecting information. And call me mean if you want, maybe I am being a bit straightforward here, but I'm sick of the sort of manipulation that is meant to make men and women fight each other and to make women try to smush men's faces into the ground when they're already struggling, when there's no reason to be going against men like this. Let people write what they write, let people read what they want to read, and stop trying to manipulate people into reading things that they don't enjoy. Because then at the same time, you'll end up getting these people that then go and give a chance on your book that they don't enjoy, and then they'll say it, and then you'll attack them for it. So just stop. Turning it to nonfiction, which is read by slightly more men than women, that's not surprising. The pattern is similar, because also what is most nonfiction? It's hobby stuff, politics, self-help, and crime. I mean, there's more than that, but that's like the majority that I can break it down to on the fly. Men still read male authors much more than female ones, but the discrepancy isn't so large because women tend to do the same in favor of female authors. But there is still quite a difference. Women are 65% more likely to read nonfiction books by the opposite sex than men are. Okay, so men often write more about politics. Men often write more about crime. And I'm not going to say men only men write about crime, because Anne Rule is like the queen of true crime nonfiction. And there are a couple of them. But men still write more about write more about politics, and write more about crime, and write more about specialty things other than being a woman. There are a lot more books in the nonfiction section about specifically catering to women by women. And men aren't going to pick those up. Men are also not going to pick up memoirs necessarily that are specifically about female experiences as often as they pick up memoirs that interest them, be it somebody that worked in their industry, like a cop memoir or a pilot's memoir or an army memoir or anything like that. So you just have to consider, again, the subject matter. Who is this book written for, and what is the target? You know, when we're talking about marketing, we're constantly talking about who is the target audience, and that includes gender and experience and genre specifically, because genre has something to do with also the reader's genders. We talk about that all the time, but here this author is saying that that shouldn't even matter. We shouldn't take into consideration what the target audience is anymore, and everybody should just be the same target audience. That suggests that men are consciously or unconsciously do not accord female authors as much authority as male ones, or women aren't writing as much in the subjects in which they are interested. Again, I think a majority, I'm 100% positive, the majority of my crime novels or true crime books are by men. I think Anne Rule is the only one I have over there, to be honest with you. Or they make a lazy assumption that women's books aren't for them without trying them out to see whether that is true. Well, if it is about a woman's experience with pregnancy or menopause, then yes. I'm thinking of back at university when we had, I can't remember all, I'm trying to recall what all we had come to visit. So every term we had 3 books assigned to us that we had to read because the guests were coming, and it was a nonfiction, a poetry, and a fiction book. And of the nonfiction books that I can remember us reading, we had Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist, which nonfiction, female audience, hated that book. I'm not a fan of Roxane Gay either. We had one about the Tampa Zoo, that was by a man. We had one by a couple that was about IVF, and it was obvious that the woman led that story. They kind of did back and forth, like a dual perspective memoir for that, but because it was about their journey through IVF and having their baby and the complications that came with that. But it's clearly a woman's journey, and I'm trying to remember what else we read, but I cannot remember the other 2. But already you can see a difference there. We got The Zoomaker, we've got Having a Baby, and then we've got Bad Feminist as like the 3 nonfictions that I can remember us reading. I wonder why dudes would be less likely to pick up a book by a woman if it's nonfiction. Because I think it's still very common that when it's a nonfiction book, the writing still very much is about female experiences. And again, not saying all of them, but I'm just pointing out it is very common that when women write nonfiction, it's generally influenced in that way. And men are definitely going to be more interested in picking up nonfiction books that are from vets and specialists in industries that maybe they're interested in going into or they came out of, or some sort of specialist like that. And generally, women don't have those same kinds of experiences. And they don't have the experiences in the same way, in the way that he might be looking to learn from. This is not just bad for women's book sales. Oh, so this is about the dollar. I see what you're doing there. It narrows men's experiences of the world. I've known this for a very long time, that men aren't interested in reading our literature. Bernadine Evaristo told me. She comes off as another man-hater, by the way. So what does that say about our society? Our literature is one of the ways in which we explore narrative, explore ideas, develop our intellect, our imaginations. If we're writing women's stories, we're talking about the experience of women. We talk about the male experiences from female perspectives. And so if they're not interested in that, I think that it says a lot, and it's very damning, and it's extremely worrying. It seems to me that we're seen as less important and more insignificant, and that's a big problem. So again, dismissive of men, specifically to say women matter more, but also this is a very unhealthy mindset to have. I know plenty of writers' spouses who have zero interest in reading what their partner is working on because they're not interested in reading. It's just not a hobby that they do, or they're not interested in that genre, so they don't read it. And it doesn't mean they don't value their partner's opinions. It doesn't mean they don't value their partner, and it doesn't mean they don't talk. Some people are just not your audience, and that's fine. So this shows a lack of understanding that you just don't have to appeal to literally everybody. And everybody doesn't have to do and follow everything that you do in order to find a value in you. That's such an unhealthy mindset to have. And I remember somebody that I knew who said she knew who her true friends were by who purchased her books and read her books consistently. And that's so impossible. Like in the Loinstream group, there are so many different writers of various styles and genres, some of which I'm not personally interested in, but I still find a value in those. And that's one of the reasons why I started the Fresh Meat feature, is because I have a very limited scope of what I'm actually interested in, and books take time to read. So I can't read them all. But if I can help share other indie books to people that would be interested in that genre, that's a win. It doesn't mean that I don't like the person or don't support a person because I'm not personally into what they're doing. So stop putting that value on subjective taste or personal preference. If women writers do want to be feted, it helps if they write mainly about men. Nicola Griffith analyzed the 6 most important US and UK literary fiction awards over 15 years and found that the more prestigious the award, the more likely the novel would have a male main character. For instance, in 15 years, the Pulitzer Prize between 2000 and 2015, more than half of the winners were books by men about men. Of the female winners, half of the novels were about men and half were about both men and women. No winners, neither male nor female, wrote a book starring women or girls. So again, there's no breakdown here of what any of these books were, what any of these prizes were, and also this is a stupid measure for anything because it's not a participation trophy where you have to have 50% and 50%. You get the best of the best. And if this is a problem, then stop putting people's names on books and give out awards before the book gets published, because obviously once the book is published and it's super popular, everybody knows who the author is. So you can't do this. So start making it blind. Yet novels are supposed to be about the human condition, not just the male condition or the female condition, but you keep writing about women's things. Stop. Look, you're making me sassy. Either this means that women writers are self-censoring, or those who judge the worthiness find women frightening, distasteful, or boring, or not. Stop picking those words. Like, maybe people are just writing more about male characters doing things. I'm sorry, but that could just be the thing. I've noticed that with Bodymore, which features a female main character, she acts in an atypical way, and some people have problems with it. I've actually seen more women have problems with Joey being a tomboy than I have with men having problems with Joey being a tomboy. No offense, but it's been interesting to see that women judge the socialness and the social interaction of a female character much more harshly than men judge the social interactions of a female character. If she doesn't fit in. Certainly, the results argue for women's perspectives being considered uninteresting or unworthy, writes Griffith, or the books were just not being submitted. There are not that many books going out there that have a bunch of female protagonists doing things. Books written by women are just not as often submitted to these contests as books by men. There are many different things that go into these selection processes. And so this isn't a fair take. Also, you're putting insulting words in people's mouth who aren't here to defend themselves. You're just making assumptions, again, based on your own perspective. This lack of acknowledgement is also very hurtful to female authors. Oh, shut up. Dolly Alderson is a highly successful writer whose memoirs Everything I Know About Love was a Sunday Times bestseller and won the 2018 National Book Awards for Best Autobiography. Yet in Britain, at least, it had almost no interest from men. So let's do a little research here. Number 1, it's called Everything I Know About Love, and it's a memoir. It sounds like a personal essays about love and relationships from a woman. I wonder why men would not be as interested in that. So let's do a little research here. This is what the cover looks like. Oh my gosh. Feminism, romance, self-help. I wonder why men would not be interested in this. It is by women for women. The random emails and recipes are boring and could have been left out. So they're just random emails and recipes. This is just a woman's scrapbook of her life. It really reads like an overprivileged white middle-class woman who doesn't have much self-awareness about her own privileges. I think that she might think a lot of what she's writing about: excessive drinking, drug taking, Tinder dates, paying extortionate taxi fares for the lols. Is relatable, and maybe it is for some people or for other people in her social bracket, but it's not for me. My low rating was largely due to the awful selfish attitude Dolly takes in her friendships. I understand the odd pang of envy when friends are getting married and you're far behind, but Dolly seemed to genuinely wish for her friends' lives to go wrong just so their attention could be focused on her. Oof. That's also the kind of stuff that goes behind freaking Layla, I swear. So no wonder this book would not interest men. Are you kidding me? Are there men complaining about the readership of war memoirs is not more female? Then stop complaining that your book about feminism and romance and your high society social club does not have more male readers. I'm sorry. This is dumb. Every newspaper and magazine journalist sent to interview her was a female, and it was, as she told me, marketed and perceived and received as something incredibly niche by dint of my gender. I mean, feminism was marked enough on Goodreads that it was in the tags, okay? It is niche. Yet a female experience is not a niche experience. It's a universal common interest. Okay, I have to take that 1-star review even more serious. Kind of coming off egotistical here to say everybody should have to read this because my experience is universal. I have a feeling that it's not, lady. Can you just imagine the gall that it takes to say, this is my life and everybody should read it because it is incredibly important and my life is not niche as an upper class. Okay, let's go look at this again. And there's the author. Oh my gosh, are you serious? She talks openly about how being rejected from Bristol University affected her self-esteem in her teens and 20s and how she still feels resentful of anyone she meets who went there. She still feels resentful. This person is just a cranky bitch that is trying to say that everybody should have to read and enjoy her book because she's got an ego problem. This is not a man versus woman problem. This is a you problem. You need to get yourself checked out and stop treating your mental problems and your egotism like it's a social issue. Oh my gosh, this is why people don't want to read you. I take that personally. Okay, sweetie. Yet, when she went on a publicity tour in Denmark, a rather more progressive country, it was quite different. She told a male journalist who had been sent to interview her that he was the first ever. He couldn't believe how weird that was. He was in his 20s and said that he and his friends read memoirs and fictions by women just as much as those by men. Things can be different. It's a very easy problem for men to fix. All they have to do is actively seek out books by women. Stop telling people what to do, okay? I know there's irony in me telling you what to do, but stop it. But the UK and the US still have a very long way to go. When Esquire magazine drew up a list of the 80 best books every man should read to describe the greatest works of literary fiction published, only one was written by a woman, Flannery O'Connor, and she had a gender-neutral name. That's kind of a leap to say that this is why she was on the list. So citations, please, for any of that. Stop picking random things. Female authors from George Eliot to Bronte's sisters to J.K. Rowling's have had to change or disguise their names to persuade men and boys to read them. I was very tempted to publish this book under the name M.A. Sygart. You also can't compare people that were publishing back when women had a different place in society, when they actually were not recognized like the Bronte's sisters, to the way that things are now, because things have changed. And if you would like to argue that there has been zero progress in the system, go ahead and do that. But I'm pretty sure that women are outpacing men in college enrollment, and there are more female agents who are picking who gets published out there. So you're going to have a hard time convincing me. But feel free if you would like to say, hey, women have a harder time at doing this because women. Go ahead. I'll listen. You might expect Esquire's list to be a matter of blokes recommending to blokes books. You might expect Esquire's list to be a matter of blokes recommending to blokes books written by other blokes. But would you expect it to be, say, the New York Review of Books? In 2019, only 29.6% of its reviewers were women. And of the books it reviewed, only 31% were by women. So, just as the men are reluctant to read female authors, they are also reluctant to review or recommend them. Okay, let's also return to the fact that women more commonly, constantly, in high propensities, right? Romance, paranormal romance, chick lit, women's fiction. And those kinds of things are more niche. They are more specialized. They have their obvious audience where they are excessively popular, but they don't get as much attention with the general audience because they are actually niche. Look, not everybody wants to read about your tentacles and mermaid love, okay? It happens in this niche, and it's a very popular niche, but it's not going to get in Esquire or the New York Review. And again, you can't remove all of the nuance from all of these genres to just say everything is equal and it makes sense, because it doesn't. Just as men are reluctant to read female authors, they are also reluctant to review or recommend them. Even in the NYRB, we have blokes recommending books by blokes. The cultural gatekeepers, the people given authority to pass judgment on books, the critics are mainly men. And they are according authority to books written by other men. How can women writers expect to be taken seriously by men if male critics largely ignore their existence? How about stop writing romance then? If you want to be noticed by the male critics, why don't you start writing what the male critics are reading? Affinity is a joyful thing, writes the novelist Anne Enright. I have often admired the ease with which men praise books by other men and envied slightly the way they sometimes got admired in their turn. Their spiral of male affection twists through our cultural life, lifting male confidence and reputation as it goes. Work by men is also read and discussed by female critics. Only one side of the equation is weak, the lack of engagement with women's works by men. Stop. Oh my gosh. This just reads like the naggy girlfriend that is like, well, why aren't you working? Why aren't you doing the dishes? And it's like, I just got home from work. Can you leave me alone for 2 seconds? This is the woman that makes her partner miserable because she's always nagging that he's never doing enough and he's never good enough. And it's so annoying. She's telling all of them. It's a gaggle of harpies here that are trying to dictate how everybody else is supposed to act, what everybody else is supposed to read, and that if you don't like what you're reading, well, you better suck it up and you better like it, bitch. Whole genres are dismissed by the book review pages. The easy reading thrillers and crime mysteries and speculative fiction, which none of those are, I would say speculative is not equal to the crimes and thrillers, by the way, that men enjoy are reviewed. No new books by Lee Child goes unnoticed, and when male authors such as Nick Hornby or David Nichols write commercial books that deal with relationships and family life, they too get reviewed. But the female equivalent are often categorized derisively as chicklit, women's fiction, and romance, and are usually overlooked by serious papers. Please let us note that the agent of the author has to submit the book to the prizes. So they're going to review the costs of submitting the books to see and to see if there is a financial gain to be had there, because most of these contests cost money, some of them hundreds of dollars just to submit your book, and if there's no chance of winning, they're not going to be submitted because it's a waste of money. Now, chick lit and women's fiction are legitimate genres. I know some people absolutely hate the terms. I don't think they're derisive. They're very specific for what it is. They deal with women's issues, with women's relationships. Chick lit is lighthearted, and I don't particularly like them. Now, there are some, apparently, they can be popular. Like Mean Girls. If it was a book, it would be chick lit. Probably. It was kind of it was satirical, but it was satirical chick lit. Apparently the hot chick is considered chick lit. It's a very specific thing. The Sisterhood of Traveling Pants, I think, is women's fiction. I think Eat, Pray, Love is women's fiction. But there are very specific details, like not necessarily tropes, but elements in these stories that drop them in that topic. And it is important to know that it goes there, just as it is important to know the elements of a true crime before dropping it into true crime. Because if somebody goes into true crime expecting, not murder, they're going to have a bad time. Genres descriptions only help to prepare the reader for what they're about to go into. And it's a very difficult thing to learn, honestly. If chick lit novels are reviewed, it's to be rude about them. So you want people to read your books, and then you force them on people, and then people go, I don't like this. I don't like this. So what is it that you're asking for? To force men to read books that they're not interested in, that are written for women, and then they're not allowed to criticize them at all? This is participation trophy, ladies. Work on your self-esteem outside of what men think about you. She started writing fiction in the 1990s, soon after the first Bridget Jones book was published, so her publisher decided to package her as a chick lit author. That was so that you could make money. Again, it is packaging to appeal to an audience base that exists in order to pull in the most money. Am I saying that the author is always going to be happy with how they are packaged up and presented to readers? No, because sometimes authors wanted to be deeper than they actually end up being, or they wanted to write in one genre and they find out that they're writing in this other genre and they have more success in that other genre. it can be disheartening to know that you're not the type of author that you wished that you could have been. I read other people's books sometimes. I'm like, dang, that's good. I wish I could write this kind of lighthearted, cool thing with these lovable characters. With just these lovable characters, but I can't. All of my books were discussing quite big issues, but the blurbs were so-and-so has a job, but can she find a boyfriend? Maxie had no say in how her books were marketed. That's pretty typical of marketing in general. Again, that's not the men's issues. That is entirely the publishing industry trying to make back the money that they are putting into your book. So blame them. But they just see the elements of your book and who it's going to apply to and then put it over there. If that's not what you want and you want it marketed to somebody else, then that's something you have to discuss with your agent and with your publisher, and they'll have to make the final call. I know stacks and stacks of very nice men who aren't at all prejudiced against women, but they just automatically think that they won't have anything in common with a book by Serena. Her first thriller as Alex, The Wicked Girls, was widely reviewed, praised by Stephen King as one of the top 10 books of the year and won a prestigious Edgar Award for Best Paperback Original. So, again, let's look at this. Chick lit, it was received by women and appreciated by women. However, and then she did a thriller, which is a much more commercial and versatile genre, one of the top 5, since chick lit is, in there, but it's not one of the top 5 biggest ones. Thriller is one of the big ones. And she credits her popularity and her widespread to this as being under the name Alex, not because the genre has a different audience base. This is either insincere and malicious, or this person doesn't know at all what they're talking about, because it is not the name change that changed the audience base here. It is the genre base. It's very clear from my Amazon reviews that my readership is much more male, and I'm not about 50-50 in my I'm about 50-50 in my following on social media, whereas before it was entirely women and men that I knew. It changed everything for me having a new name. No, it changed everything for you changing genres. One-star review on Amazon said, I do not like thrillers from female authors. I would never have bought this book if I had known that Alex Marwood was a made-up name for a British female writer. She has it up on her bathroom wall. So she seems, number one, obsessed. 2, you get 1-star reviews for all sorts of things. That is not proof of literally anything. 3, we don't know if that person was a female reader, because female readers can also dislike female authors. It happens. The male reviewers at the Spectre were 4 times more likely to recommend books by other men than books by women. The female reviewers were much more even-handed, recommending 42% men and 58% women. That doesn't look equal, ladies. At the TLS, too, the men recommended books that were 69% by men and only 31% by women. The female split was 44-56. Or should you say, it was only recommended 44% to females 56%. See, when you throw in those extra words, it matters. Even in the news statement, the men showed exactly the same 63-31 bias, but it was at least counteracted by female reviewers recommending many more books by women. So male critics are according much more authority to male writers than female ones. But in this same paragraph, you're saying that women writers are according more authority to female authors as well. So like women are just counter-doing what the men are doing and preferring male authors or in choosing male authors. So you can't penalize the men for picking male authors when the females are also picking female authors above the male authors. It's literally a mirror of itself. As a result, readers are led to believe, first, that men have more authority in recommending books to read, and second, that books by men are much better than books by women. Neither is true, but both serve to exacerbate the authority gap. Again, that is your opinion. You put more authority and credit on men, which is why you say this. Mary, you're the one with the problem here. Bernadine Evaristo says that she makes a point in trying to redress the balance. When I'm asked to recommend books, I nearly always choose women, and I nearly always choose Black women or women of color because I know that if I don't, they're very unlikely to be on the list. So I make a point of doing it because then there will at least be 2 or 3 books there that are not by white people and not by white men. So again, you're going the opposite way, showing a bias in an opposite way. You can't hold other people. You can't be angry at other people when you are specifically politicizing your picking of books based on demographics rather than what the contents of the books are. Male interviewees recommend 4 books by men for every 1 book by women, whereas women are extremely even-handed, recommending 51% men and 49% women. Male, I would say probably majority of the books I would recommend are by men. Way more than 51%. Half of the male interviewers mentioned no women writers at all. This connects across to the lowly status that women have in novels written by men. Men remain, on average as a group, remarkably resistant to giving women more than a third of the character space in their stories. Well, I guess don't look at my books, because mine outnumber men to women, like 3 to 1, 4 to 1, a lot. And that's just how I write. But again, BS, complaint, if you're not interested in that, fine, whatever. But you're the one, again, this is reading into something that is not there, that was not said, but she goes and sees how this story is written or what these people read, and then puts further context on it that doesn't exist to create a problem, so that she can then tell people what to do. The author Lauren Groff tried to redress the balance when she did her By the Book interview in May of 2018 by naming only female authors. So you are going completely against the grain, and you're going completely against what you said was a problem. And not only that, but you're making it worse, and you're doing it out of spite. Look, I try to be the kind of person that I wish there was more of. I try to express the ideas and embrace the ideas that I think are healthy, are good, are moral, that I want to see. And I don't do this reactionary crap of, I see 5 men over there, well, I'm going to go and grab like 5, 6 females so I can fight up against that and be a reactionary. You need to constantly express what you believe is the moral way that you would like things to be, which would mean if you believe in 50-50, then you would want to do 50-50, not go full the other way. Because going full the other way doesn't express whatever you said the initial thing was, which was equality, right? So this tells to me you're not interested in equality, you're interested in squashing out this entire demographic of writers with ones that align with you demographically. I get what you're doing here, but you're not following your own quota, your own ideals that you're stating by being biased only towards women. She signed off by asking, when male writers list books they love or have been influenced by, as in this very column week after week, why does it almost always seem as though they have only read 1 or 2 women in their lives? It can't be because men are inherently better writers than the female counterparts, and it isn't because, how come it couldn't be that? And it isn't because male writers are bad. We know that they are not bad people. In fact, we love them. I could not tell. This reads so much of man-hatred. Okay. We love them because we have read them. Something invisible and pernicious seems to be preventing even good literary men from either reaching for books with women's names on the spines or from summoning women's books to mind when asked a list of influences. Look, all of my list of influences are like, if you go to my Goodreads page, it's like Bret Easton Ellis, PKD, Brian Masters. Look, I don't think I have a female on my influences list. I just don't. And some women write stuff where they are going to have a bunch of female influences on their list. That is just an individual thing. Again, it's not a problem that people have preferences in what they read and what they're generally drawn to. I don't understand this level of control of telling people what they have to read. It is surely some men's blind spots when it comes to letting women's views into their lives, admiring their writing, and according their literary authority. Would Mary like to come and interview me about my preference for male writing? Because she doesn't seem to think that women at all, or females at all, could have a preference for male books and male writing and not care about women writers in the same way that she's sitting here thinking about this. Because she looks like she needs some perspective over here. Sociologists from Queens College CUNY looked at 2 million titles published in North America between 2002 and 2012, and they found on average that books by women priced 45% lower than books by men. So now we're going to talk about the wage gap in freaking books. Are you joking me? But it has consequences too for all of us. Women's voices are not being heard. Women are more than half of the culture. If half of adults in our culture have no voice, half of the world experience is not being attended to, learned from, and built upon. Humanity is only half of what it could be, writes Nicola Griffith. That's not what it means. That's not what this means. Books are leisure, okay? Which is why it is so cheering that the Man Booker Prize, which previously recorded only marginally better than the Pulitzer, decided to award its 2019 prize jointly to Margaret Atwood's The Testaments and Bernardine Evers-Stow's Girl, Woman, Other. I wonder why nobody would be interested. I wonder why men would in general not reach for Bernardine Evers-Stow's book when it's called Girl, Woman, Other. Both novels by women, about women. Oh. And in Evers-Stow's case, about women of color. Progress is finally being made. Let's hope this spreads more widely. Let's hope that women's writing starts to be valued as much as men's, and that men start to open their minds. How come something tells me that if my books were put in front of these women as judges, they would totally just push them off to the side? Because my name is Ian, and they don't take into consideration actually anything beyond their own close-mindedness and trying to overcompensate for their own bigotry by coincidentally being more bigoted. It wasn't until she was in her 60s that Evers-Stow felt her work was at last being taken seriously. It's always been a struggle to reach the wider audience. This just feels like what's typically imposter syndrome, and to be conferred with the kind of respect that white men have traditionally had in their culture. Can you stop assuming what other people's lives are like? Because that's a problem. I am not supposed to assume other people what lives other people have had based on their sex and their race. So how come you can assume that other people have lived certain lives based on their race and gender? Stop. And to what extent was it because she was a black female? Sometimes we have to break it down, don't we? Are we talking about race? Are we talking about gender? Are we talking about class? Or are we talking about education? All these things play a part. The fact that I was the first black woman to win the Booker, or the first black British person to win the Booker, tells a story itself. That's not what it's about. It's about telling stories. Stop making this political. Stop making this about your identity. And this is why it gets so annoying for you, is because you make responses to your book and people reading your book some sort of personal thing when it's actually just a hobby. You're using it to feed your ego, and then it's hurting you. So stop it. And then you think for some reason you're allowed to tell people what to do because of that. There were 4 women on the panel and 1 man, and I think that made history. There were Are we breaking the rules again? I thought this was supposed to be equal, so how is it now a 4-1? We can't live in your utopia when you keep breaking your own utopian rules. At the same time, our society has changed somewhat over the last few years in that there is a more receptive, in that it is more receptive to black women's arts, ideas, culture, and literature. So I think the time was right for a book such as mine to break through. And it did take 50 years for that to happen. And I did have to share the prize, although, as I always say, I will take it any way it comes. So there you have it. This isn't about books. This isn't about reading. This is about controlling people and then making women superior, is what this article is telling me. These people are on an ego trip. They think that they deserve the world because of who they are or what they are, rather than by the work that they are doing. At least that is the takeaway that I have. So, those are my thoughts on this. This video is long enough for me interjecting everything in there. I'm looking forward to what you guys think of this article, this subject, and the statements made in here about men and women and writing and prizes and whatnot. So let me know all of that and more down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry. Flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore. but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?